Hi everyone. Although the era of Origipop ended roughly 60 years ago, its influence is still widely felt today. Even though many of the songs are long forgotten, some still pop up and are heard today in sometimes the most unusual of places.
Are you having any fun? What you getting out of living? Who cares for what you've got if you're not having any fun?
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy.
Initiate environmental subprogram 43 Isaac.
Up in the clouds, so dark up above. And the sun's in my heart, and I'm ready for love.
What's the last thing Lord Business expects master builders will do?
Build a spaceship? Kill a chicken?
Marry a marshmallow.
Why this?
How you gonna keep 'em down on the farm?
No!
And beyond these individual songs and their random appearances, original popular music still impacts and affects our modern culture in many ways, from classic Christmas songs to revivals of old musicals. And one of the more slightly unusual ways that the Origipop legacy lives on today is through two relatively recent musical television shows. Although Galavant and Schmigadoon are very similar on the surface, they're both musical comedy TV shows that ran for 2 seasons and both, to varying degrees, parody aspects of original popular music, they are also quite different in their direction, format, and how directly or overtly they parody Origipop musicals and songs. So today, let's take a look at these two shows, learn a bit more about their history, plot, and music, and although it's ultimately entirely subjective, see if we can determine somewhat objectively which one is better, and why is Galavant. And let's actually begin with Galavant, simply since it came out first. And just FYI, there will be minor spoilers ahead. Galavant was created by Dan Fogelman and featured songs by Alan Menken, music, and Glenn Slater, lyrics, all three of whom had worked together on Disney's Tangled. And of course, Alan Menken is best known as the composer of some of the best movies of the Disney Renaissance. Galavant premiered in 2015, had an 8-episode first season, and despite low ratings, was given a second season, which consisted of 10 episodes and which aired the following year. The show aired on ABC, and because it was a network television show, had normal half-hour episodes, roughly 22 minutes excluding ads. But there were actually 2 episodes which aired each night back-to-back in an hour time slot, which meant that the first season was only on air for 4 weeks, and the second season only aired for 5 weeks. The show, set in a fantasy medieval setting, follows the exploits of Galavant, a knight who has had his heart broken by his former love, as he attempts to win her back from the evil, or maybe just misunderstood, King Richard. Then, in the second season, the story follows Galavant and Richard, now friends, as they attempt to rescue Galavant's new lady love and reclaim Richard's crown. Galavant was cancelled after its second season in 2016, but since the creators of the show knew the cancellation was coming, they wrapped up almost all of its storylines pretty well, leaving only one little thread on the off chance they got another season.
Now we're almost done, our tale completely spun, as buffed and polished as a royal jewel. There's not much left to tell, and hey, that's just as well, unless we get one more surprise renewal. Now, we'll probably have to go and get work on some cheap-ass cable network, but the door is not quite shut, so if we make the cut, here's what you'll see on
The complete show was released on DVD in 2017, and there were a couple versions of official soundtracks released as well, so the songs are also pretty easy to find. Although the ratings weren't great, Galavant was generally well received by critics, who compared it favorably to productions like Monty Python, Princess Bride, and Robin Hood Men in Tights, and praised the comedic elements, clever and cheeky lyrics, and rambunctious energy of the show. Now, let's take a quick look at Schmigadoon, and then we'll do a bit of compare and contrast between the two, and analyze what works and what doesn't for each. Schmigadoon was created by Cinco Paul and Ken Dario, the former of whom actually wrote all the music and lyrics to the songs in the show. The show was created for the streaming service Apple TV+, now known as just Apple TV, and had a 6-episode first season, which premiered in the summer of 2021, and a second season, which also consisted of 6 episodes, which aired in the spring of 2023. And even though it was a streaming show, almost every episode of Schmigadoon was released a week apart in the more traditional television practice. Additionally, while the length of each episode varies a bit, they're all around half an hour long. The plot of Schmigadoon revolves around a couple who are having relationship issues, and who, during an attempt to patch things up, stumble upon a magical town where everyone acts like they're in a musical. In the first season, the town is Schmigadoon, and the show parodies some musicals from the 40s and 50s, the era known as the Golden Age of musicals. While in the second season, the city is now Chicago, and the musicals being parodied are more like those from the 60s and 70s. Schmigadoon originally aired on Apple TV and can still be viewed there. There doesn't seem to have been any release on physical media, and there might not ever be, considering the current media landscape. As a result, the only way to view it would be to subscribe to Apple TV. Although the show was not renewed for a third season, it received high praise from critics who recognized the affectionate parody of musical theater present and enjoyed the inside jokes, top-notch choreography, and infectious enthusiasm of the cast. So, on the face of it, there are a lot of similarities between these two shows. They are both comedies, both musicals, they both have 2 seasons, and although Galavant has 18 episodes and Schmigadoon only 12, each episode of Schmigadoon is a bit longer than each episode of Galavant. They both have roughly 2 to 3 songs per episode, each a couple minutes long on average, with an additional reprise here and there, and both shows have a song total of around 50 to 60 songs across both of their respective seasons. But despite these similarities, these two shows are really quite a bit different. Perhaps the most obvious difference is their relationship with original popular music generally and musicals of that era specifically. On the face of it, Schmigadoon seems to be much more a parody of and homage to old musicals. The name and general concept comes from Lerner and Loewe's Brigadoon, and in each season, the setting, characters, and plot points are almost all taken directly from famous musicals from their respective eras. Conversely, Galavant is much less direct in its parody of musicals and has its own unique story, characters, and generic fantasy setting. However, when we start to look at both shows more closely, this breaks down a bit. Schmigadoon is only based on a very few number of old musicals, and especially in Season 1, doesn't really parody common musical tropes as much as it makes fun of the stereotypes of the early 1900s setting, and even that, as we'll discuss in a bit, is a bit uneven. And Galavant, despite it being advertised as just a musical television show and not promoting itself as a parody of old musicals like Schmigadoon, has nonetheless several loving nods to songs from musicals and even a few musical tropes. From parody songs like the West Side Story one, Dwarves vs. Giants, and the Grease parody, Finally, to even some of the plot points like one-time adversaries Gareth and Madalena ultimately falling in love, Galavant has more homages to old musicals than it would seem initially. Additionally, while Schmigadoon only really focuses on a few very well-known musicals, such as Season 1's focus on Carousel, The Sound of Music, and The Music Man, and maybe a little bit of Oklahoma, Galavant has references to more obscure Origipop songs, such as the title of Episode 4 of Season 2, Bewitched, Bothered, and Belittled, a reference to a song from the Rodgers and Hart musical Pal Joey, and the song Let's Agree to Disagree, which is a send-up of Fred and Ginger's Let's Call the Whole Thing Off, from 1937's Shall We Dance. Overall, while Schmigadoon positions itself as a clever parody of old musicals and certainly does have many more references than Galavant and uses whole plot points from such musicals to drive much of its story, Galavant actually has many references of its own, some of which are deeper cuts than what you find in Schmigadoon. But this isn't the only difference between these two shows that makes me feel like Galavant is the better show, especially in reference to how it carries the Origipop legacy. Although ultimately entirely subjective, I feel that the music and songs of Galavant are much better generally and a closer reflection of the Origipop style specifically than what is heard in Schmigadoon. As I've mentioned before on this channel, Alan Menken has a knack for writing songs that really sound like they are Origipop songs. They are less pop-y, have a more straightforward, simplistic melody, and follow a clear, direct form, even if that form is not the same simple AABA or ABAC forms of most Origipop songs. His music flows better, the course of the melodies feel inevitable without being predictable, and the songs are more easily reproducible by a person in their home than most other modern musical songs. But that's not to say that Alan Menken can't write in various styles. He has written multiple songs in Galavant and elsewhere that are parodies of other songs or various other styles, but he always does so in a way that maintains some of those key elements of original popular music, while also ensuring each song is its own unique and separate work. This stands in contrast to what is heard in Schmigadoon. While I do think that the show's songs did achieve their goal of evoking the style heard in old musicals, I just don't think they're terribly well done. In my opinion, most of the songs sound either like a cheap knockoff of an old musical number, or they just sound like a direct copy with a few notes changed. Examples of the former are widespread, but include He's a Queer One, That Man O' Mine, and I Always Always Never Get My Man, while examples of the latter are the title song Schmigadoon and the Do-Re-Mi parody. While I feel like the vast majority of Galavant songs are fun, catchy, and clever, there are only a handful of songs from Schmigadoon that reach that level. I like You Can't Tame Me and its reprise, as well as Suddenly, but otherwise the songs don't seem terribly catchy, with some of them even having melodic decisions that seem odd and unusual to me. Additionally, the lyrics don't seem to me to be as clever or funny as those in Galavant, and there are many, such as With All of Your Heart, which just repeat the same lyrics a couple of times instead of having different verses. Now, I will admit that Schmigadoon has more and better dancing, and its musical numbers as a whole do seem to be more in a traditional, if somewhat stereotypical, musical style. Additionally, Galavant certainly does have some weak songs, especially in Season 1. However, overall, I feel that the music and songs of Galavant are just a bit better and more in line with the Origipop style heard in old musicals than those from Schmigadoon. Now, in addition to the issues around each show's relationship with older musicals, it is also worth looking at how each show stands on its own merits. Does the setting, plot, message, characters, and humor hold up and work together in a way that makes a good show overall? And here again, I have to say, Galavant is heads and shoulders above Schmigadoon. Let's first look at setting. In Season 1, Schmigadoon is set in a generic turn-of-the-century American town. This matches a few musicals, as we mentioned before, but when they try to parody The Sound of Music, set almost 50 years later, it makes for a rather jarring scene. And this is only exacerbated in Season 2, when the primary setting of the 1920s to 30s era is seen right next to the much later and different-looking hippie era of the 60s and 70s. Additionally, there is a really odd aspect to the turn-of-the-century setting of Season 1 that I want to mention, and it concerns race. Much of the humor and plot points of the first season rests on making fun of the backwardness of that time period, with the apparent exception of race. Children out of wedlock, homosexuality, just sex in general, are all treated as taboo subjects, as they would have been in that era. But when it comes to race, the town looks as if it had the benefit of
colorblind casting.
Except that then it doesn't, maybe, as the Reverend's wife mentions miscegenation in interracial relationships as a tribulation brought on by the newcomers. This reference is odd and feels out of place, and the way the show deals with its unusual setting just feels muddled and unclear. Overall, this weird aspect of Season 1, as well as the disparate periods Schmigadoon chose for its settings, was jarring and led the show to having an odd, anachronistic quality which took me out of the story a bit. Galavant, on the other hand, avoids this problem by choosing a generic medieval fantasy setting. And with the exception of a few jokes here and there, the show sticks with this setting. And I think the fantasy fairy tale setting works really well because musicals are really fantastical. Obviously, a real-world setting works just fine for musicals, but a fantasy setting is also a really good choice. And by not tying themselves down to one or a few specific settings of musicals or even a real-world era at all, Galavant is able to do much more with its plot, characters, and comedy. Now, let's take a look at the story and message of each show. And I want to be clear, I'm looking at those as two separate things. The message is the main point the show is trying to get across, kind of like a moral, while the story is the plot, everything that happens in the show to try to get that message across. First, the message of Schmigadoon is a bit messy and not terribly clear. In the first season, we're shown that the main couple is having relationship troubles, although what specifically is wrong is a little unclear. It's sort of implied that Josh gives up easily, although that seems unlikely for a successful surgeon. And we're told, but not really shown, that Melissa wants things to be more perfect and blames Josh that they're not. Josh is also shown multiple times as being a bit insensitive, and that's not really ever addressed adequately. So overall, the main point of the show is that their time in Schmigadoon makes them realize that despite their recent difficulties, whatever they may be, They really do love each other and can learn to change something and be better. Ultimately, it's not a bad message, it's just not very clear. But what's worse is how the story tries to get this message across. The majority of the episodes focus on the two leads trying to fall in love with other people in a really fast and forced manner. And then both of them think that they have found someone else to love at the end, before realizing that they actually don't, because they're still in love with each other, I guess. It just doesn't feel realistic or natural in any way. And then there's the uncomfortable fact that at the end, the two leads seem to have lied to and then end up just abandoning the people in the town they said they loved and who had fallen in love with them. But the worst part of the story is that at the beginning of the last episode, we're shown a supposedly meaningful scene that presents them as an understanding, compromising, happy couple the night before they made it to Schmigadoon, which completely undercuts the entire idea that they had serious relationship issues in the first place. The entire story, it seems, therefore, is ultimately based on a lie. But regardless, at the end of season 1, the main couple is supposed to have resolved their issues and realized that relationships take work and true love is about mutual respect and effort. But then in season 2, they're having trouble again, albeit of a different sort, decide to try to find Schmigadoon once more, and then ultimately get stuck in Schmicago, and told they can't leave until their relationship has a happy ending. And then at the end, when they can leave, they're told happy endings don't exist, but every day can be a happy beginning. The lesson season 2 is trying to teach is just unclear and convoluted. But actually, for the first half of season 2, I really thought the story was much better than season 1. The focus isn't just the two leads bouncing around from relationship to relationship, but there's actually a real plot, with Josh being arrested for murder and Melissa trying to solve who really did it so she can free Josh. But then after episode 3, I feel like it all falls apart a bit. Josh gets off just because, and the two leads just kind of hang around in Chicago for the next couple episodes, with Josh teaching and leading the hippies, and Melissa performing, neither of which comes back at the end to progress their characters in any way, before a final episode which just hastily and unsatisfactorily fixes everything. So, those are the issues I have with Schmigadoon's message and story. Now, I don't like videos that criticize things without offering an alternative. But in the interest of trying to keep this video shorter, I have a separate video in which I discuss how I would change Schmigadoon to address these issues and make the whole show a bit better. You can check that out if you'd like, but regardless, it's my opinion that Schmigadoon has several issues with its message and story. Galavant, however, has perhaps a simpler message, but both it and the story are overall much better. The message is the stereotypical fairy tale true love conquers all, but it is clear and straightforward, and there are also a few other points about personal growth and overcoming setbacks to achieve more than what you previously thought possible. And the story is generally paced well, with each episode following a natural structure and each season progressing nicely. I will admit that the second half of season 1 drags a bit, and there's not a lot of progression, but besides that, the story is straightforward, entertaining, and features interesting twists and turns and a real build until an epic final battle at the end of season 2. With the exception of the last few episodes of season 1, there really isn't anything I would really do to improve the plot of Galavant. Now, let's take a look at the characters in each show, again starting with Schmigadoon and then moving on to Galavant. I feel like the characters in Schmigadoon were a bit weak. I've already mentioned my issues with the two lead characters, but I feel like there are problems with most of the other characters as well. From the one-dimensional side characters, such as Danny Bailey in the first season and the hippie followers in the second season, to the slightly more developed, but ultimately flat and uninteresting, more major characters, none of the characters in the town of Schmigadoon or the city of Schmicago seem terribly realistic or have believable, interesting journeys that they go on. It's also a little odd because given the fact some season 1 characters come back in season 2 as different people entirely, it's almost like they're not even real, and as a result they don't matter or progress at all. But even if we ignore that aspect of it, the characters just seem predictable and uninteresting, and I just didn't really identify with or feel invested in any of them in either season. Conversely, in Galavant, almost all the characters are excellent. There's real, meaningful, and believable character development, although the chef and Gwen do sort of just disappear towards the end of season 2, which is a bit odd. But overall, I feel much more emotionally invested in these characters than those in Schmigadoon. Despite the over-the-top nature of the show and many of the characters, you can really identify with some of their struggles, like in this case, King Richard.
I don't know how to do anything except be a king. No one wants me to be a king. If I'm just a jolly nothing. What am I supposed to do? I don't have a skill, no niche to fill, no one to come home to. Don't know where to go, don't know how to fit, don't know who to even be.
Despite the very silly nature of the whole show and story, the characters and their journeys, both literal and symbolic, feel real and meaningful, much more so than what is found in Schmigadoon. And now let's move on to our last category, humor. Although humor is extremely subjective, I also don't think Schmigadoon is terribly funny. The character I thought was the funniest in the first season, the carnival barker, Danny Bailey, is hardly seen after the second episode, and much of the rest of the humor, like the gay mayor, seemed obvious and predictable. For both seasons 1 and 2, I laughed maybe a few times when watching it, but that's about it. Conversely, the comedy in Galavant is the aspect of the show that I feel really surpasses Schmigadoon. There are so many jokes in Galavant that are legitimately laugh-out-loud funny. While there are a few that are a bit predictable or simplistic, there are many more that are clever, unique, or just plain silly.
I can't move my arms or legs. I think we trained too hard.
Well, that's not good.
I know it's not good.
How did you get on the horse?
I slept on the horse.
My father?
Right. What happened to him?
You had him killed, sir. You killed his father before him. Your family has killed the last 4 generations of chefs in my family.
I'm under a terrible amount of pressure. You have to understand that.
Oh, it's fine, Maggie. Don't worry about it.
The show is very self-referential and breaks the fourth wall numerous times to great comedic effect.
I never thought I'd live to see my oldest son with such a bushy beard.
It's not bushy, it's correct for the period.
Wormwood is in Valencia, and they plan to invade us on Sunday, January 31st, 8 p.m. Eastern. Set your DVR.
It makes fun of itself in numerous ways, from its poor ratings to the fact that everyone's always singing.
Will all the singing kill our Nielsen ratings?
So, overall, despite the many similarities between these two musical TV shows, Galavant and Schmigadoon are really quite different. While Schmigadoon is more obvious about its more numerous old musical references, Galavant, for a couple of reasons, really seems to me to be closer to a wider array of these old musicals. And the story, characters, and humor of Galavant also seem to be much stronger than what's found in Schmigadoon. Of course, this is all fairly subjective, and if you have a different opinion, that's totally fine. I think the most important thing here is that both shows do a pretty good job of carrying on the Origipop legacy. And if you're a fan of Origipop and old musicals and you haven't seen one or either of these shows, definitely check them out. But if you only have time for one, I'd recommend Galavant. Thanks for watching.
This plateaus we must fill, and though I doubt we will, we're gonna try and get